Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things you want to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, remove all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Now that the wheel's out of the way, let's move along to the axle nut. We're going to use a 36mm to remove the nut. Just to let you know, it's a good idea to replace the nut anytime you remove it. Now let's use a hammer and punch. We're going to come right into the center and break the axle free from the bearing. Let's find where the flex hose connects onto the strut. We'll remove this 12mm headed bolt. As you remove things, just give them a quick inspection, make sure they don't have to be replaced. After that bolt's out, make sure the flex hose is free from the strut. Now we're going to deal with the ABS wire. We want to look for 2 10mm headed bolts that hold the mounting brackets. There's one located right here. We'll get that out of the way. Keep following that ABS wire up to the top bracket that leads to the body. We'll use a 10 on that. Now let's move along to the 2 bolts that hold the knuckle to the strut. For these, I'm going to use a 19mm on the bolt head and a 22mm for the nut. Now we can wiggle this around, remove our bolts. Now once you have both of those removed, let's carefully start bringing this down. And I'm saying carefully because we still have our flex hose and our ABS wire connected. We do not want to put a tug on either. Now once it comes down, we're just going to go ahead and grab onto that axle and we're going to try to pull it out of the wheel bearing. The next thing I always do is use something to tie around the axle, essentially as a safety strap. We're going to bring it right up to the strut to hold it in position as we continue. All right, so now the next thing you're going to want to do is put a nice collection bucket underneath the transmission where the axle goes into. After that, we're going to use a pry bar and a hammer. We're going to get in between the axle and the transmission and gently pry. Now we can get our safety strap out of here and remove the axle from the vehicle. With the axle out of the transmission, have a close look at the seal. It's a good idea to go ahead and wipe it down, give it a thorough inspection. If it needs to be replaced, now's the time to do it. Okay friends, now it's time to install our brand new left front axle. Let's go ahead and carefully line it up with the hole in the transmission. Once it feels as though it's starting to go in there, try pressing. Now what you want to pay attention to is at the area where the axle meets up to the transmission. You want to make sure it's completely pressed in. Once you do, go ahead and grab onto the point that's closest to the transmission and try pulling the axle out. If it slides out, it's not locked in, you need to try again. Let's use some copper never-sees inside the port of the bearing. Now we can slide the axle into the knuckle. Slide it into the bearing as well. Before you connect the knuckle onto the strut, make sure you clean the mounting bolts. Once you have both the bolts clean, apply a thin amount of red thread locker to the threading. Now we can go ahead and take this and put it into position. Be very careful not to damage your flex hose or your ABS wire in this process. Let's get the nuts on there. Now we can bottom these out. Once you have them snug, torque them to 116 foot-pounds. Now we can start reconnecting our brackets. I'm going to start with the ABS wire where it connects onto the body. Go ahead and start that 10mm headed bolt in there. Let's get this one back on here as well. Flex hose. Now we can snug them up. Make sure each bracket is tight as you go. Let's get our new axle nut on there. Now you want to make sure you bottom this out by hand, and then we'll get it closer to the ground so we can torque it. Now closer to the ground, we can go ahead and torque this. To be able to torque it, I'm going to try to put my pry bar in between the studs. Now just lock it in place. At this point, we can go ahead and torque this nut to 181 foot-pounds. Once it's torqued, the next thing you want to do is lock it down. Looking at the axle, you can see it has a little notch. We need to take a hammer and punch, come right in the center of that, and just kind of peen it in a little bit to lock the nut in place. Now we can start on all of the lug nuts. We'll bottom them out, get the wheel back on the ground, and torque each of them to 80 foot-pounds. Okay, friend, we got the car back together. What's left to do now? Now, typically, you're going to want to take it for a road test, listen for noises, and make your way down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.